All right. So this week I wanted to talk about Aleister Crowley. And the reason why I wanted to talk about Aleister Crowley is because he was my entry point into magic and the occult. And I'm pretty sure I first ever heard of him through Ozzy Osbourne's song. Because Black Sabbath was also kind of my entry point into the world of metal. So thanks, Ozzy. Ozzy Osbourne really changed my life. I never really acknowledged that until now. God bless you. Anyways, if you've explored magic or occultism in any way, you've obviously heard of Aleister Crowley. He's a man that kind of has a myth that outlives him. The mythos that surrounds Aleister Crowley is often a lot bigger than who he actually was as a person. Although who he was as a person was also pretty extraordinary in a lot of ways. And I remain agnostic as to whether or not Aleister Crowley was a quote-unquote good person, but he was at least an extraordinary writer and scholar of magic and the occult, and an incredibly bright and prolific author. And he achieved a lot in his life, and he was fascinating. He really lived a life in a really adventurous, bold, and courageous way. And we'll get into that a little bit, as well as what some of the controversy is around him. Was he actually this satanic black magician that you should be afraid of, or not? Is it dangerous to encounter his work? If so, I am certainly fucked, as I probably have the largest collection of Aleister Crowley books in all of Indonesia, I would imagine. But I've read a lot, many thousands of pages of Aleister Crowley's fascinating and mystifying writings. And I do have association with certain Thelemic institutions, and I do resonate with a lot of Thelemic beliefs and practices as well. So before we get into this, I wanted to preface this podcast by saying I'm not in any way an expert when it comes to Aleister Crowley. And if you're interested in exploring some source texts that can do a better job at framing the beast than I could, I would really recommend reading Perdurabo by Richard Kaczynski. Israel Regardie, who is also a very famed magician and who was Aleister Crowley's secretary, wrote a very good book about him, and I think it's called The Eye of the Storm. I know that it was recommended to Robert Anton Wilson by Alan Watts, and Alan Watts said it was the most fascinating book he had read all year, and that was Robert Anton Wilson's introduction to Aleister Crowley. And Robert Anton Wilson has one of the best takes on Crowley, I think. I love hearing Robert Anton Wilson talk about Crowley. Recently, there was another book published about Robert Anton Wilson's ideas on Crowley that's called Lion of Light. That's also very good. So I would recommend those three books. Those are biographies that I think represent Aleister Crowley and his life and work pretty well. And then additionally to that, if you're interested more in the magical practices and philosophies, I really recommend David Schumacher's work. David Schumacher was a coach of mine for a couple years, and he's a Jungian psychologist as well as a practicing Thelemic magician. But I think he has one of the most clear and grounded approaches into Thelema and Aleister Crowley's work. He's written two books that are both very good. The first one's called Living Thelema. The second one is called The Way of the Will. And then additionally, I would recommend Lon Milo Duquette's work, especially his book, The Magick of Aleister Crowley, that gives a really detailed and clear overview of various rituals and practices and concepts within Thelema and how they can be correctly practiced and what they mean. So I would recommend those resources if you're interested in something a little bit more reputable than me as a source for engaging with Aleister Crowley's work. And I would recommend reading some of those texts honestly before reading Crowley himself. In terms of introduction, there's not really a clear way into Crowley's work. It is vast and sprawling and nebulous, and he wrote so much about so many different subjects that it's really hard to just say, here is the Crowley book that you should read. I know that there's a Samuel Weiser compilation that I think is called the Condensed Aleister Crowley. That might be a good compilation to read through that would give you an overview of some of the more essential texts. And if you really want to dive into it, I think a good place to start would be Stephen Skinner's most recent annotated version of the 4 Books of Magic by Aleister Crowley, which is a version of his magnum opus, Liber ABA, which is also called Magic and Theory and Practice. That's the original title, but Stephen Skinner's version is called Aleister Crowley's 4 Books of Magic, and that is one of the deepest and most condensed compilations of his essential works on magic and his essential thoughts on magic. It's the book he spent the most amount of time on and will give you the most robust information in terms of his practices around magic. And then the other dense and robust compilation to Magic and Theory and Practice would be Gems from the Equinox, which is another very big book that you could probably use to defend yourself if you ever were attacked in your home. If you threw it at somebody's head, it would probably kill them. And that's another very dense and organized exploration of Aleister Crowley's writing on magic. But there's a lot of crossover with those 2 texts as well. Like a lot of the writing in Gems from the Equinox is to be found in Magic and Theory and Practice, and vice versa. So who is Aleister Crowley? Aleister Crowley is a figure who continues to captivate, confound, and challenge scholars, spiritual seekers, and the general public alike. Often branded as the wickedest man in the world by the sensationalist press of his time, and that's an enduring legacy. Crowley was an enigmatic individual whose life and work traversed the boundaries of conventional society. He was a man of immense intellect, a prolific writer, a dedicated mountaineer, an explorer of consciousness, and a self-proclaimed magician. His influence on modern occultism, spirituality, and even popular culture is profound and multifaceted. To truly understand Aleister Crowley is to embark on a complex journey through his history, practices, philosophies, and the controversies that enveloped him. This podcast seeks to delve into some of those aspects and to unravel the layers of a man who sought to redefine human potential and spirituality. Aleister Crowley was born Edward Alexander Crowley on October 12th, 1875, in the town of Leamington Spa, Warwickshire, England. And he was the only son of a wealthy family, entrenched in strict religious devotion. His parents were members of the Plymouth Brethren, which was a very conservative evangelical Christian group known for its literal interpretation of the Bible and its emphasis on personal piety. Crowley's father, Edward Crowley, was a successful brewer who retired early to focus on religious preaching and philanthropy. His mother, Emily Bertha Bishop, was equally devout, and the household was steeped in religious observance and moral rigidity. From a young age, Aleister Crowley exhibited signs of exceptional intelligence and a rebellious nature. The death of his father from tongue cancer when Aleister Crowley was just 11 years old profoundly affected him. His father's passing not only removed a guiding figure from his life, but also exacerbated tensions with his mother. And his mother used to refer to him and scold him as the beast due to his rebellious nature, a term from the Book of Revelation, highlighting her disapproval of his behavior and his questioning of religious doctrines. And rather than being chastised by this moniker, Crowley ended up embracing it and finding in it a symbol of defiance against the constraints that were imposed upon him by his religious upbringing. He also was very fascinated with a lot of the writing from the Bible, and I think you can kind of see stylistically a lot of that biblical type prose shining through in his writing, especially the book of Revelation and the Whore of Babylon from the book of Revelation found its way into an important symbol of the goddess Babylon in Crowley's work. Aleister Crowley's education was marked by a series of conflicts with authority figures and institutions. In fact, Aleister Crowley's entire life was marked by a series of conflicts with authority figures and institutions. If you had Aleister Crowley as your student or anybody that needed to participate with a group and be cooperative, he was a real pain in the ass. He attended Malvern College and later Tonbridge School, where his disdain for the rigid structures and punitive measures of the educational system grew. He found solace and expression in literature, poetry, and his burgeoning interest in the occult. These early experiences of rebellion against established norms laid the groundwork for his lifelong quest to explore the fringes of human experience and spirituality and human potential. However, in 1895, Crowley matriculated at Trinity College, Cambridge, where he initially pursued studies in chemistry. However, his true passions quickly emerged as he shifted his focus to English literature and philosophy. He immersed himself in the intellectual and cultural life of the university, contributing poetry and essays to various publications. Crowley's poetry from this period often grappled with themes of existentialism, spirituality, and a questioning of traditional moral values. Cambridge also provided a fertile ground for Crowley's other interests. He became an avid mountaineer, undertaking expeditions in the Alps and other challenging terrains. These adventures were emblematic of his desire to push boundaries and conquer both physical and metaphysical heights. His proficiency in chess further demonstrated his strategic thinking and intellectual prowess. It was during this time, while he was at Cambridge, that Crowley's fascination with the occult deepened significantly. He began to study esoteric texts, delving into subjects such as alchemy, mysticism, and ceremonial magic. This period marked the beginning of his serious engagement with occult practices, setting the stage for his future endeavors. And despite the fact that Aleister Crowley mostly maintained an identity as a poet throughout his life, he would become most famous for his work and endeavors related to the occult. In 1898, seeking a more structured exploration of the occult, Aleister Crowley joined the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. The Golden Dawn was a secret society dedicated to the study and practice of the occult, metaphysics, and paranormal activities. It drew from a rich tapestry of traditions, including the Jewish Kabbalah, Hermeticism, Rosicrucianism, and Eastern mysticism, and a lot of Egyptian influence. The order was known for its complex system of initiation, rigorous study requirements, and elaborate rituals designed to facilitate spiritual development. The Order of the Golden Dawn still exists to this day. Although it is not an unbroken lineage, it had died and been resurrected at various times throughout history. And if you're interested in learning more about its practices, the work of Israel Regardie is considered the foremost resource on the legitimate practices and teachings of the Golden Dawn. However, the work of Chick and Sandra Cicero also is a great resource into the practices, initiations, and exercises taught by the Golden Dawn. And I think something that's really important to understand about the Order of the Golden Dawn at the time is that we really take for granted how much of esoteric philosophy and practice is accessible to us today. You can go into any bookstore and find books about the tarot, about astrology, about scrying and channeling and divination and manifestation and all these different practices related to magic. But at the time, this is the Victorian era, there was an immense amount of oppression around these kinds of subjects. So they were very underground, and the Order of the Golden Dawn had a lot of prominent members. I think the most famous and prominent member of the Order of the Golden Dawn, besides Aleister Crowley, is the poet and writer W.B. Yeats, who famously had some really heated altercations with Aleister Crowley. They did not get along. But this was something really special to be a part of. This was truly occult information at the time that required a lot of responsibility in order to be initiated into, in a way that we're very privileged to have accessible to us. Crowley's dedication and keen intellect allowed him to progress rapidly through the ranks of the Golden Dawn. The Golden Dawn is structured into different tiers of initiation that are grades, and supposedly Aleister Crowley rose through the grades very, very quickly. He was particularly drawn to the practical aspects of magic and the direct experience of the mystical. However, his tenure in the order was not without conflict. His unorthodox interpretation of rituals, combined with a confrontational personality, led to disputes with other members, including prominent figures like W.B. Yeats. Internal schisms within the order were exacerbated by these conflicts, culminating in legal disputes and public scandals that eventually led to Crowley's departure. There's a story that Aleister Crowley at one point stormed the order, and it resulted in a physical altercation between him and W.B. Yeats, in which he was kicked down a stairwell. Whether that's hearsay or that actually happened, it makes for an interesting story. But Aleister Crowley was undeterred by these setbacks, and he embarked on extensive travels that would further shape his spiritual and philosophical outlook. I think it's also important to provide context to understand that Aleister Crowley inherited his father's fortune, so he had, at the time, unlimited wealth. His father would have been like the owner of the Guinness Corporation or something like that. It was a very huge corporation for alcohol. It was a brewery, and so Aleister Crowley inherited enormous wealth and pretty much spent all of it on travel and his endeavors in spirituality and self-development. Between 1900 and 1903, he journeyed through Mexico, where he continued his mountaineering and delved into local occult practices. In Mexico City, he allegedly attained the rank of 33-degree Freemason, although the legitimacy of this claim has been a subject of debate among historians. Crowley's travels continued to Japan, Hong Kong, and Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, where he studied Buddhism and Hinduism. And one of Aleister Crowley's mentors, Alan Bennett, within the Order of the Golden Dawn, actually became a Buddhist monk in Ceylon. So Aleister Crowley went to visit him, to spend time with him, and that's where he first encountered and learned Buddhist practices. And he also studied Raja Yoga, which is a very strict form of meditation practice, while he was there. He spent time in India learning yoga and meditation, disciplines that would become integral to his later magical practices. These experiences exposed him to a diverse array of spiritual traditions and philosophies, enriching his understanding and contributing to his syncretic approach to magic and mysticism. A pivotal moment in Crowley's life occurred in 1904 during his honeymoon in Cairo with his new wife, Rose Edith Kelly. Aleister Crowley engaged in a series of magical rituals intended to invoke the Egyptian deity Horus. Well, actually, he was trying to call upon the sylphs, which are air spirits And he did this within the chamber of the Great Pyramids. And then, according to his accounts, later on, Rose entered a trance-like state and delivered messages from an entity named Aiwass, who she claimed was a messenger of Horus. And there's kind of a whole drama about discovering this, that Rose was in this very fugue-like state where she wasn't really conscious and kept having these vivid recollections of memories of Egypt and telling him information as if she was channeling it. And according to Aleister Crowley, knew things that she wouldn't have known because she wasn't somebody who was particularly studied in Egyptian mythology or the occult. And it led them to the Stele of Revealing, which was plaque number 666 within the museum in Egypt. The Stele of Revealing is very important within Thelema because it represents the three main gods and goddesses that are part of Thelemic philosophy, which is Nuit, Ra-Horkuit, which is a form of Horus, and Hadit. So the discovery of the Stele of Revealing through Rose's trances was a very important aspect of the reception of the Book of the Law, which is the kind of fundamental religious event within the religion of Thelema. And I am pretty agnostic about it. I think it's a very interesting text to read. Whether or not it's authentically channeled or a forgery is very much up for debate. But basically, Rose in her trance state said that Crowley had to go into his chamber at very specific times for these 3 days. And it's in those 3 days, those 3 sessions, that he channeled through the Book of the Law. The Book of the Law would become the foundational text of Thelema, the religious philosophy that Aleister Crowley established. The book is composed of 3 chapters, each attributed to a different Egyptian deity, Nuit, Hadit, and Ra-Horkuit. The central tenet of Thelema, which, by the way, means will in Greek, was encapsulated in the phrase, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," which emphasizes the importance of discovering and adhering to one's true will. This concept extends beyond mere personal desires, representing a profound spiritual calling aligned with the cosmic order. So this is something that's often misunderstood. Do what thou wilt does not mean do whatever the fuck you want. It means that we each have an essential true will, an essential nature, similar to how an acorn has the essential nature of becoming the oak tree. And it's for each of us to discover what that is, and that's something unique to each of us, and to live devotedly in accordance with that as our own personal religion. And that's what that means, and it actually denotes a lot of restriction and discipline. It doesn't mean do whatever you want, which is something that Aleister Crowley is often misunderstood and criticized for. The complementary phrase, love is the law, love under will, underscores the role of love as the unifying force that must operate within the framework of one's true will. Thelema advocates for personal freedom and spiritual growth, urging individuals to break free from societal constraints and to pursue their unique paths towards enlightenment. Crowley's subsequent works sought to elucidate and expand upon the principles of Thelema. He was a prolific writer, producing an extensive body of literature that includes poetry, essays, plays, and a comprehensive array of treatises on magic and mysticism. His writings reflect a deep engagement with a wide array of subjects, blending insights from both Eastern and Western traditions. One of his most significant works is Magick in Theory and Practice, where he provides a detailed exposition of his understanding of ceremonial magic. Crowley spells magic with a K to distinguish it from stage illusions and to denote its serious transformative nature. He defines magic as the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. In this context, magic is both an empirical science requiring methodological experimentation and an art demanding creativity and intuition. Crowley's approach to magic was systematic and comprehensive. He developed a set of practices and rituals designed to train the mind and body to alter consciousness and to facilitate communion with higher realms. Central to his system were the ritual tools of the magician, the wand representing will, the cup symbolizing understanding and the subconscious, the sword denoting reason and analytical thought, and the pentacle representing the material world and the totality of experience. Each tool served as a focal point in rituals, aiding the practitioner in directing energy and consciousness toward specific goals. The Jewish Kabbalah, particularly the Tree of Life, was integral to Crowley's magical framework. He utilized the Tree of Life as a map of the universe and the human psyche, exploring the connections between the Sephiroth, or spheres, and paths as avenues for spiritual ascent and self-discovery. So I think that the root of Crowley's magical system is looking at the Kabbalistic Tree of Life as a ladder of human consciousness and human potential that can be worked through practically and systematically and followed to reach our highest potential, which is ultimately to achieve enlightenment, to ascend to essentially a level of consciousness that would be equal to godhood, unity, undifferentiated source consciousness, and therefore to transcend the material plane of existence and the sufferings that come with the attachment to the material world. His work, Liber 777, exemplifies his commitment to synthesizing knowledge across traditions. This text is a compilation of correspondences that link various deities, symbols, planets, and concepts, demonstrating the symbolic interconnectedness of different esoteric systems. And I remember actually Liber 777, which I think I first discovered at the bookstore Borders, which doesn't even exist anymore. But if you remember Borders, good times. Anyway, I didn't know what Liber 777 was when I first discovered it. I tried reading it before I had a deeper understanding of Aleister Crowley and his magical system and magic itself, and it just didn't make any sense. And it's a reference book. It's not meant to be something that you read. It's meant to be something that is worked with practically and referenced in designing rituals. And so it's magician's tables. So it's a table of correspondences. It shows that there are symbolic attributions and resonances between different plants, different colors, different tarot cards, different gods and goddesses from various traditions. And Aleister Crowley mapped all of this out onto the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. So that's a very short description and overview of what Liber 77 is, and I hope that gives you a better understanding of it if you ever seek it out and attempt to read it. Crowley's engagement with Eastern practices was a significant aspect of his work. His studies in yoga and meditation informed his understanding of consciousness and provided practical techniques for spiritual development. He emphasized the importance of physical postures, asanas, which is different than the word asana as it's used in hatha yoga or bendy, stretchy yoga postures. Asana meant the capacity to stay perfectly still in specific meditation postures, and that's what he taught. There's actually an exercise in which a meditator has to sustain a bowl filled to the brim with water on their head for the duration of the entire sit. It's usually 1 hour without spilling it in order to prove that they've mastered that asana and be able to move into the next stages of practice within meditation. He also emphasized breath control, which is known as pranayama, and concentration meditation, which is known as dhyana, as means to discipline the mind and body to achieve altered states of consciousness and to prepare for advanced magical work. And actually, it was quite groundbreaking at the time for Aleister Crowley to be implementing meditation practice into his work as a magician. It was not something that was a part of previous magical traditions, although the Golden Dawn had some practices that were similar, such as focusing on elemental tattvas, which are glyphs that you would visualize that represented elemental energies. But still, this was a time before Buddhism and Eastern yoga proliferated into the zeitgeist, and so it was quite cutting edge for Aleister Crowley at the time to begin to teach about these practices. And supposedly he achieved quite advanced states of concentration in his own practice as a meditator. Perhaps one of the most controversial dimensions of Aleister Crowley's teaching is his exploration of sex magic. He posited that sexual energy is a potent force that, when harnessed correctly, can lead to profound spiritual experiences and transformations. Through specific rituals and practices, sexual acts were elevated to sacramental events imbued with symbolic significance. Crowley's openness about these practices, particularly in the conservative context of early 20th century society, contributed to his notoriety and sensationalism surrounding his persona. And Aleister Crowley did not invent sex magic. It's something that existed within many other traditions into antiquity. And Aleister Crowley first encountered these works and learned sex magic through the Ordo Templi Orientis, which at the time Aleister Crowley was not the head of, but was initiated into. It was a secret society that now is the main organizing body for Thelema. So the Ordo Templi Orientis still exists and has proliferated throughout the world. There are groups and factions that continue its initiatory structure and practices to this day. Crowley's interest in Enochian magic further illustrates his dedication to exploring the boundaries of human consciousness and spiritual knowledge. Enochian magic, developed by the 16th century alchemist John Dee, who is, by the way, one of the most interesting and fascinating people in history. And please, I would love to see a film made about John Dee. It's possible that William Shakespeare based one of his characters off of him in the play The Tempest. And I just think John Dee was such a fascinating person, and I would love to see a movie about him someday. But that's a subject for another time. Would love to do an episode about John Dee another time as well. And John Dee's associate, Edward Kelly, acted as John Dee's scry during John Dee's Enochian magic work. And they claimed that they were communicating with angelic beings that communicated to them in a received language, which was known as Enochian. And Crowley delved deeply into Enochian practices, believing they offered a powerful means to access higher dimensions and to gain esoteric knowledge. His work, The Vision and the Voice, chronicles his journeys through the 30 Enochian aethers, providing detailed accounts of his visions and the insights he gleaned. The Vision and the Voice, basically Aleister Crowley's trip reports of his astral projection experiences doing the Enochian aethers, and it's fascinating stuff. Really, really out there, really, really psychedelic and vivid. And if it was not something that he actually experienced, it is at least profoundly inventive and creative and psychedelic, and it's very much worth reading. Central to Crowley's philosophy was the concept of initiation, a transformative process involving self-confrontation and overcoming personal limitations. He believed that true spiritual advancement required individuals to confront their own shadows, to undergo symbolic death and rebirth, and to emerge with a renewed sense of purpose aligned with their true will. His initiation rituals were elaborate and often demanding, designed to challenge the practitioner's resolve and commitment. In some cases, they even involve self-mortification, like cutting yourself and bleeding and things like this, which is certainly controversial. Despite his significant contributions to occultism and spirituality, Crowley's life was marred by controversy and public scandal. The British press seized upon his unconventional lifestyle, branding him the wickedest man in the world and sensationalizing his activities. Reports of drug use, sexual promiscuity, and alleged involvement in black magic fueled public fascination and condemnation. I mean, he was openly bisexual and sex positive in a very conservative time in which that was absolutely vilified. He was very outspoken about his drug use, especially with the drug cocaine and later marijuana and certainly psychedelics like peyote, which he was exploring at a time when that was something not well known and very obscure. He actually sued against the tabloids that slandered him, and he took the case to court, and he actually won the case against the tabloids, which I think is something interesting and slightly redeeming of his character in a certain sense. Crowley's personal relationships often defied societal norms, involving multiple partners and explorations of sexuality that challenged the moral codes of his time. His establishment of the Abbey of Thelema in Cefalù, Sicily, was intended as a communal space for living according to Thelemic principles. However, the abbey became the subject of lurid rumors involving orgies, drug use, and unorthodox rituals. The death of a disciple, Raoul Loveday, who died, by the way, by drinking water from a stream nearby the abbey, which supposedly Crowley suggested not to, as it was water unfit for consumption, is the reason why he died. But these circumstances were sensationalized by the press, which led to increased scrutiny. Italian authorities eventually closed the abbey, and Crowley was expelled from the country. Crowley was adept at manipulating his public image, often embracing his infamy to provoke thought and challenge societal hypocrisies. He understood that by positioning himself as a transgressive figure, he could draw attention to his work and stimulate discourse. However, this strategy also meant that his genuine philosophical and spiritual contributions were frequently overshadowed by sensationalism. So he kind of invented that idea of the rock star PR, sort of like Aleister Crowley or Marilyn Manson or Lil Nas X, this kind of controversial satanic figure who employed shock and awe to drive more attention to themselves. Aleister Crowley was kind of the first person to do that, and obviously there have been countless people since who have emulated that as a strategy for increasing notoriety and mystique around their public perception. The controversies surrounding Crowley raise important ethical considerations about his practices and teachings. Critics argue that his emphasis on individual will, if interpreted without ethical grounding, could lead to selfishness or harm to others. His exploration of sex magic and drug use, while groundbreaking in some respects, also poses questions about consent, power dynamics, and the potential for exploitation. Crowley's legacy is complex and multifaceted. His influence on modern occultism is undeniable, as he laid the groundwork for various esoteric movements and magical orders, organizations such as the Ordo Templi Orientis, OTO, and the Argentium Astrum, AA, which he founded or restructured, continue to propagate his teachings. His emphasis on personal exploration, self-realization, and the pursuit of true will resonates with many who seek spiritual paths outside of mainstream religions. In popular culture, Crowley's impact is evident across various mediums. Musicians, writers, and artists have drawn inspiration from his life and work. For instance, Led Zeppelin guitarist Jimmy Page, a known collector of Crowley memorabilia, owned Aleister Crowley's former residence, the Boleskine House on the shores of Loch Ness. And that's the house that Aleister Crowley purchased to complete his Obermelin working, which is a very intense ritual that requires self-isolation over a period of many months in order to evoke the presence of your holy guardian angel. And Aleister Crowley famously did not complete the ritual, which is considered to be very dangerous because the ritual involves summoning many demonic forces that then, after the knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel is reached, you have the ability to control. And Aleister Crowley never got to the point to be able to control or banish these demonic influences. That failure, as well as the evocation of Choronzon, the deity which represents primordial chaos, in which Aleister Crowley stood outside of his protective, banished circle of influence, are two things that some magicians credit towards Aleister Crowley's downfall and the more aberrant and demonic sides of his behavior. Aleister Crowley's image appears on the cover of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album, signaling his enduring presence in the cultural zeitgeist. Personally, I was inspired to dive deeper into Aleister Crowley's work and philosophies through the band Tool, as the drummer, Danny Carey, is a practitioner of ceremonial magic and collects Aleister Crowley memorabilia, arranges his drums in a certain kind of way that reflects geometries presented by Aleister Crowley, and has symbols on his drum heads and behind his drums that are Thelemic in nature. And the singer Maynard James Keenan also has spoken about Aleister Crowley's influence on him. So as a big Tool fan, that's kind of how I first got into Crowley's work and understood it as an exploration of consciousness and human potential. Understanding Crowley's philosophies involves grappling with several key concepts. The idea of true will is central, representing an individual's unique purpose aligned with the cosmic order. Pursuing one's true will requires introspection, self-discipline, and the courage to defy societal expectations. It is a path of self-actualization that contributes to the evolution of humanity as a whole and the transpersonal narrative of the unfolding of the cosmos and the universe. I think a really great book, if you're interested in exploring the ideas of the true will, is The Soul's Code by James Hillman. James Hillman is a psychologist. He is not associated directly with ceremonial magic or the work of Aleister Crowley, but still, I think that that book really encapsulates the idea of what the true will is and how each of us can aim to realize and become aligned with it in a way that benefits not only ourselves, but all of humanity. Crowley's proclamation of the Aeon of Horus signifies his belief in a new era characterized by self-realization and the rejection of outdated moral constraints. In this new age, individuals are encouraged to embrace their innermost desires and to align their actions with their true will, fostering a collective shift towards higher consciousness. His approach to magic and spirituality blends rigorous methodology with creative intuition. Magic for Crowley is both a science and an art. It demands empirical study, experimentation, and a willingness to explore uncharted territories of the mind and spirit. Personal responsibility and ethical considerations are crucial, as the pursuit of spiritual power must be balanced with an awareness of the impact of one's actions on others. Crowley's personal traits contributed significantly to both his achievements and the controversies that surrounded him. His intellectual brilliance was matched by a complex personality that defied simple categorization. He was a polymath, fluent in multiple languages, and possessed a deep knowledge of diverse philosophical and spiritual traditions. Yet his penchant for provocation and his disregard for conventional morality often alienated him from mainstream society and, honestly, the people around him. In contemporary times, Crowley's ideas continue to be studied and debated. His works are considered seminal texts within occult and esoteric communities, offering insights into magic, psychology, and the exploration of consciousness. I recently heard him described as the Einstein of magic. His emphasis on personal growth, self-exploration, and challenging societal norms resonates with individuals seeking alternative paths to self-discovery and spiritual fulfillment. However, engaging with Crowley's teachings necessitates a critical and discerning approach, which frankly is how Aleister Crowley approached his own work and his own experiences. And he advocated for objectivity and for self-inquiry and critical inquiry into even your experiences in magical work. It is important to contextualize his ideas within the historical and cultural framework of his time, while also considering the ethical implications of his practices. Critics caution against uncritical acceptance of his methods, emphasizing the need for responsible exploration that respects the well-being of oneself and others. And I think that this actually is very much in alignment with do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. It's about each of us taking individual responsibility to discover our true will, to understand ourselves through experimentation and exploration, and then to live in accordance with that, no matter how that looks, whether or not that's the same as how Crowley lived. You could be a Thelemite and be a very modest and quiet person. You don't have to be Aleister Crowley in order to embrace his concepts and to be empowered by them. It's really about each of us being able to understand for ourselves how to live and then to live in accordance with them. The controversies that develop Crowley's life serve as a reminder of the complexities inherent in his legacy. While he contributed significantly to the development of modern spiritual thought, his actions also highlight the potential pitfalls of pursuing power without sufficient ethical grounding. His life invites reflection on the balance between individual freedom and societal responsibility, the pursuit of knowledge, and the dangers of hubris. In examining Aleister Crowley, we confront the multifaceted nature of human endeavor, the capacity for innovation and transgression, brilliance and folly. His life and work challenges us to delve deeper into our own beliefs, to question the limitations we accept, and to seek authenticity in our spiritual and personal development. Crowley's journey underscores the enduring human desire to understand the mysteries of existence and to find meaning beyond the confines of conventional thought. Ultimately, Aleister Crowley's legacy is one of both illumination and shadow. He stands as a testament to the complexities of pursuing a path that defies convention, embodying the risks and rewards of seeking knowledge in uncharted territories. His influence persists, inviting each new generation to grapple with profound questions he raised about will, consciousness, and the nature of reality. As we navigate our own paths, the lessons learned from Crowley's experiences can serve as both guidance and caution. They encourage us to seek our own true will, to engage with the world thoughtfully and ethically, and to approach the mysteries of existence with both humility and curiosity. In doing so, we honor the complexity of the human spirit and the enduring pursuit of meaning that defines our shared journey. Crowley's life exemplifies the paradoxes inherent in the human condition, the struggle between the desire for transcendence and the pull of earthly temptations, the quest for knowledge, and the dangers of overreaching. His story is a reminder that the search for truth is seldom straightforward. It demands courage, critical thinking, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable realities. Whether one views Aleister Crowley as a visionary prophet, a misguided eccentric, or a provocateur, his impact on the landscape of modern spirituality is undeniable. His work continues to inspire, challenge, and provoke discussion, reflecting the enduring power of ideas that push the boundaries of conventional thought. I think engaging with Crowley's legacy invites us to reflect on our own journeys of self-discovery. It challenges us to consider the nature of will, the pursuit of authenticity, and the ethical dimensions of personal freedom. As we explore the complexities of his life and work, we are reminded of the profound questions that lie at the heart of human experience, the quest for meaning, the exploration of consciousness, and the enduring desire to transcend the limitations of our existence. So, what do you think? Have you engaged with Aleister Crowley's work? Has it impacted you? Do you believe that ultimately he was a positive force within the development of human potential, and human consciousness, or was he a pathological agent for darkness and decay, as some see him? I personally think that Aleister Crowley was a genius, at least as a thinker and prolific writer and scholar. I don't think he was a great person by any means. There is ample evidence to show that his personal relationships were fraught with challenges, that he often acted in ways that were self-serving, narcissistic, and even abusive. But I do think that his work is profoundly interesting, incredibly enriching, incredibly fascinating and engaging, and I love encountering his work as a writer, as an artist, as a thinker, and as a magician. I find it incredibly stimulating and mysterious and confounding and sometimes irritating. He can sometimes come off as very gaudy, very arrogant, but nonetheless, I really enjoy reading Aleister Crowley, and I would encourage you to explore some of these core ideas that have personally enriched my life. And I hope you've enjoyed this overview of Aleister Crowley's life, legacy, philosophy, and work.